Right, in this short demo, we're going to show you how to convert Kaggle's Openvaccine competition into a Kubeflow pipeline using the KFP SDK. All right, the first thing to do is, assuming that you've already got Kubeflow deployed via Kubeflow as a service, is to create a new notebook. So let's go ahead and name our notebook. Let's bump up our resources to 2 CPUs as well as 2 gigs of RAM. We're also going to want to bump up the allocation for our workspace volume from 5 to 10 gigs. Take the rest of the defaults and click the launch button. Once our notebook is up and running, let's go ahead and connect to it. And this is going to bring up Jupyter Lab. And with the Jupyter Lab UI up, we're going to want to open up a terminal session. And from here, we're going to want to git clone the Kubeflow/examples repository, and we'll see that populate in the left-hand side in our file browser. Now we're going to want to do a little bit of setup, which means that we want to go over to Docker Hub and create an account if we don't already have one. We're also going to want to install Docker locally, and once Docker is installed locally, we're going to want to then log into Docker, and we're going to be using Docker Hub as a registry for our images. Next thing we want to do is head on over to Kaggle.com and create a API token if we haven't already done so. We're going to use our Kaggle username and API token to create a Kubernetes secret, which is going to allow us to not have to pass those credentials in plain text when we run a pipeline. So let's navigate into the examples directory, Openvaccine, and then let's create a file called resource.yaml and include in it the contents that you'll find inside of the README. And this is going to allow us to create a pod default, which again is going to mean that we don't have to pass our Kaggle credentials in plain text when we run a pipeline. Next up, let's move to our local machine, and here let's verify that we've got Git, and then let's go ahead and clone the Kubeflow/examples repository locally into our development environment. From there, let's go into the directory, let's go to pipeline components, let's open up the load data directory, and here this is the PY file that we're going to use to create our load data pipeline component. So let's go ahead and build a Docker image for load data. And once that image is built, we're ready to go ahead and push that image to our registry up on Docker Hub. And we can verify that it's up there by going to Docker Hub and refreshing the repositories view. And you can see that our load data Docker image is there. Next up, let's go to the preprocess data directory, open up the preprocess.py file, and this is going to serve as the basis for our preprocess data pipeline component. So let's go ahead and build a Docker image, and once the image is built, we're ready to now push it up to Docker Hub. Once we get the confirmation, we can verify it by going to Docker Hub, refreshing the repositories view, and we can now see that the preprocess data component, or image I should say, is there. Next up, let's build our model training component. So you can see in the model.py file, this is going to serve as the basis for our pipeline component. So let's go ahead and build the model training Docker image. And once the image is built, let's go ahead and push that image up to Docker Hub. Once it's successfully pushed there, we should be able to simply refresh the repositories view and verify that we now see our model training image. Let's build our last component, which is going to be the model evaluation pipeline component. This is going to be the basis for that particular component. Let's go ahead and build a Docker image off that configuration, and then let's go ahead and push that Docker image up to Docker Hub, and this should be our final component that we should see up there on Docker Hub. By refreshing, you should be able to see the model evaluation component. Okay, up next, we're back on Kubeflow as a service. You want to open up the PY file that you've got here in your directory and substitute in the username as well as the image names and the tags that you used when you uploaded your images to Docker Hub. Now let's create a YAML file, or a pipeline configuration file, from that .py file. And once we have that YAML file, we're going to want to download it locally into our development environment. And now that we're in our local environment here, we're ready to actually build a pipeline. So let's go ahead and go to the Kubeflow UI. Let's create a new experiment for our Openvaccine pipeline. So now we've got our experiment built. Now let's build a pipeline. So click on Upload Pipeline, name your pipeline, and now let's upload that .yaml file that we had just downloaded locally into our development environment. So select it and then upload it. And now we can go ahead and create that pipeline. So now we've got an experiment and we've got a pipeline. Let's create a run. Click on the Create Run button and make sure that we assign this run to the experiment that we just created a few seconds ago. Let's fill in our runtime parameters and click Start. Now we should be able to click on the details of this particular run, and we're taken to the runtime execution graph. You can see we've created a volume, we've loaded data, pre-processed the data, done model training, and wrapped things up with a model evaluation. You can also get details about what's happening in each step by simply clicking on a step. You can get information about inputs and outputs, visualizations, details, log information, events, as well as ML metadata or artifacts. And that's it. You have successfully turned Kaggle's Openvaccine competition into a Kubeflow pipeline using the KFP SDK.